Welcome back to the Deep Dive, ready to tackle a historical giant. Today, we're looking at Alexander the Great.
A giant is right.
You bet. And your source material is fantastic. Definitely looking for more than just the basics here.
Yeah, there's just so much to unpack.
Right. So we're going to dig into what made him tick, his impact, and why he's still so relevant today.
It really is fascinating. Alexander's story goes way beyond just, battles and conquests.
Oh, sure.
He had this vision of blending Greek and Persian cultures. He was a passionate learner. Even his death is still shrouded in mystery.
Definitely keeps things interesting.
Yeah, and I think those are just a few of the reasons he's still such a captivating figure.
Absolutely. So let's start at the beginning, Alexander's childhood. Not exactly born with a silver spoon.
More like a golden scepter, right?
Yeah. His father, Philip II, was king of Macedon, already a pretty formidable military power.
Definitely set the stage for Alexander, militarily speaking. But his mother, Olympias, she brought something totally different to the table.
Yeah, she was. Intense.
Intense is a good word. Devout, ambitious, and some even say she had a mystical side, not your average ancient queen.
Definitely a unique upbringing. Imagine young Alexander soaking all that up. And then, to top it all off, he gets Aristotle as his tutor.
Talk about an advantage. I mean, Aristotle wasn't just teaching facts.
Right.
He was instilling a love for philosophy, science, literature.
A well-rounded education, to say the least.
Oh, yeah. Incredibly rare for the time.
Now, here's a fun fact, and this is for all the mythology fans out there. Aristotle introduced Alexander to Homer's Iliad.
I love this part of the story.
Right, and guess what? The hero, Achilles' Ways, he became Alexander's role model.
It makes you wonder how much that influenced him.
Totally. And this wasn't just a, schoolboy crush. This really shaped his ideas about leadership, about what it meant to achieve glory.
Powerful stuff.
For sure. And speaking of powerful, Alexander wasn't just a bookworm.
Oh, absolutely not.
At just 16 years old, while his father was away, he crushed a rebellion.
Yeah, that showed he could handle action as well as ideas.
Definitely not afraid to get his hands dirty.
Yeah.
So, pretty impressive resume for a teenager, right?
Absolutely.
And then, boom, Alexander's just 20 years old when Philip is assassinated.
Definitely a turning point.
For sure. Historians are still debating the motives, but the outcome is clear. Alexander takes the throne.
And a lot of people had doubts. Could this young, untested king hold Macedon together, especially with Philip gone?
Yeah, what do you think?
Well, Alexander quickly proved them wrong. He consolidated his power, showing, well, I guess you could say a ruthless side, but also this incredible knack for inspiring loyalty.
I mean, talk about stepping up to the challenge.
Totally. This wasn't just inheriting the throne. This was a calculated power move.
He didn't waste any time asserting himself either.
Not at all.
Several Greek city-states saw Philip's death as their chance to break free from Macedon's control. But Alexander,
He set them straight pretty quickly.
he did. And not only that.
Well, he managed to unite all the Greek forces under his command.
Wow.
Smart move, strategically.
Yeah, it allowed him to, leverage the combined strength of the Greeks against a common enemy, which was
Persia.
bingo. So now we've got Alexander, barely out of his teens, leading a united Greek army. And in 334 BCE, he crosses into Asia Minor with about 40,000 soldiers.
Launching his campaign against the mighty Persian Empire.
It's wild to think about just the logistics of it all.
Right. I mean, the sheer scale of this undertaking.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But Alexander's military genius wasn't just about numbers.
No way. His tactics were innovative. He showed incredible courage on the battlefield.
He made a name for himself.
Yeah, inspiring his own troops, terrifying his enemies.
I mean, the Battle of Granicus River was just the beginning.
Exactly. Just a taste of what was to come.
Now, the battle everyone was waiting for, Alexander versus Darius III, the Persian king. The Battle of Issus in 333 BCE.
This is where things really heat up.
Alexander was facing a much larger army.
But he wasn't backing down.
Not a chance. He knew this was a make-or-break moment.
And break it, he did. Darius had to flee the battlefield, even left his family behind. Can you imagine that?
The Persian king, ruler of the most powerful empire in the world, running from a 22-year-old Macedonian.
It's crazy. And the victories just keep coming. Phoenicia, Egypt.
And he's not just conquering territory, he's founding cities too.
Oh, yeah, like Alexandria in Egypt, one of the most famous.
And these weren't just military outposts, they were designed as centers of culture and knowledge.
Spreading Greek influence far and wide.
Exactly. So it all builds up to this huge showdown, the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BCE.
Another epic clash.
Once again, Alexander is outnumbered. And once again,
He emerges victorious.
Decisive victory this time. Darius is assassinated later on, and at just 25 years old.
Alexander becomes the ruler of the Persian Empire.
It's almost hard to believe.
I know, right? In just a few short years, he achieved what most people thought was impossible.
It really speaks to his strategic brilliance and also to his ability to inspire and motivate his troops.
Totally. I mean, you'd think conquering the Persian Empire would be enough for anyone,
You'd think so.
but not for Alexander.
Nope. He decides to push eastward into Bactria and Sogdia, modern-day Afghanistan and Uzbekistan.
Tough terrain, tough opponents.
Right. That's where he faced some of the fiercest resistance. Showed that his path to domination, it wasn't always a walk in the park.
No, definitely not. And this part of his journey, I think it reveals something else about Alexander.
What's that?
His fascination with other cultures.
Huh. Tell me more about that.
He doesn't just conquer and move on. He's genuinely interested in the people he encounters, their customs.
So he wasn't just a conqueror.
No, there was more to him than that. In fact, he ends up marrying Roxana, the daughter of a Bactrian nobleman.
Now, that was a controversial move, even by today's standards.
For sure. Some historians see it as a political strategy, a way to solidify his control over the region.
Makes sense.
But others, they see it as a genuine attempt at cultural integration. And his marriage to Roxana wasn't the only example. He starts incorporating Persian customs into his own court, encourages his soldiers to marry local women, even starts wearing Persian clothing.
Wow.
It was a bold vision, maybe even radical for the time.
Yeah, like this fusion of Greek and Persian cultures into one unified empire.
Exactly. But it created some tension.
Yeah, I bet.
Some of his Macedonian troops saw it as a betrayal of their traditions.
Understandable.
Yeah. Imagine trying to maintain control while promoting such a, revolutionary idea.
Well, it's been a constant balancing act.
Definitely. And it's a testament to Alexander's ambition, his belief that he could reshape the world according to his vision.
Absolutely. But as we'll see, that vision faced some pretty big challenges, both from within his own ranks and from the sheer vastness and diversity of the empire he was trying to build.
Right.
So speaking of challenges, in 326 BCE, Alexander crosses the Indus River.
Into India.
That's where he meets one of his most formidable opponents, King Porus.
Fought with war elephants.
Can you imagine?
I know. The Battle of the Hydaspes River. That was one for the history books.
Definitely not something Alexander's troops had ever seen before.
No way. They had to adapt quickly, and they did. They pulled off a hard-fought victory.
But victory came at a cost. The Indian campaign took a toll on his troops, and they refused to go any further east. They were exhausted, homesick. They had been fighting for years.
Yeah. I mean, they forced Alexander to turn back.
It's a good reminder that even the greatest conqueror
Has to listen to his troops sometimes.
Exactly. And that journey back, brutal, especially crossing the Gedrosian Desert.
So many died from thirst, exhaustion.
It shows that even Alexander, with all his brilliance.
Couldn't always control the circumstances.
So here we have Alexander, back from the edge of the known world. He achieved this incredible military success.
But he's also facing internal challenges, growing discontent among his troops.
It's a pivotal moment.
Definitely. Alexander's ambitions were still burning.
But the realities of ruling such a vast and diverse empire were starting to set in.
And those realities would catch up with him, in a way no one could have predicted.
That's right, because just as Alexander is planning his next campaign, fate throws a curveball his way.
A big one. So, Alexander makes it back to Babylon in 323 BCE. Heads still full of grand plans, new conquests.
But you know what they say about the best laid plans?
Right. Fate had other ideas.
He gets sick, and within days, he's gone.
Just like that. The world's most powerful man, dead at 32.
It's hard to believe.
I know. And to add to the mystery, we still don't know exactly what killed him.
Malaria, typhoid fever. Some even say poison.
Yeah, the theories just keep swirling.
It's a reminder that even someone like Alexander, who seemed almost superhuman.
Still mortal.
Exactly. And his death, so sudden, no clear heir, well, it threw the empire into chaos.
Total power vacuum.
Yeah.
His generals, the Diadochi, they start vying for control.
And the empire that Alexander had so carefully built.
Fractured. Split into several different Hellenistic kingdoms.
So it makes you wonder, what if he had lived longer? Could he have held everything together?
Tough question. Some historians say the empire was just too big, too diverse.
Inherently unstable.
Right. Impossible to govern effectively in the long run.
But others point to Alexander's leadership, that almost like mystical ability to inspire loyalty.
Yeah, he brought together people from so many different cultures.
Think about his troops. They followed him across continents, through deserts, over mountains.
That kind of loyalty, it's rare.
So what do you think? What if he'd had another 10, 20 years?
Who knows? It's tempting to think he could have solidified his empire, quelled the infighting among his generals.
It's a fascinating what if.
Definitely. But even in his short life, Alexander's impact was huge.
Oh, yeah. He spread Greek culture across vast territories, set the stage for the Hellenistic period.
Which saw a flowering of art, philosophy, science.
Exactly. And his influence reached far beyond his own lifetime. Think about the Library of Alexandria.
He envisioned it, but didn't live to see it completed.
Still, it became one of the greatest centers of learning in the ancient world, a testament to his love of knowledge. It's amazing how one person's vision can have such a lasting effect.
Absolutely. And let's not forget his military innovations. I mean, military leaders still study his tactics and strategies today.
His use of combined arms, the emphasis on speed and mobility,
His ability to adapt to different terrains, different opponents.
all hallmarks of a brilliant military mind.
He wasn't just a conqueror. He was an innovator, a leader who pushed the boundaries.
But we have to acknowledge the darker side of his legacy, too.
Of course, thousands died in his campaigns, cities were sacked, populations displaced.
Conquest, even when it's framed as cultural unity.
It always comes at a price.
Right. We can't ignore that human cost. Every war, every conquest, and Alexander's campaigns were no exception.
It reminds us that even the most celebrated figures, well, they're complex, often contradictory.
Alexander was a visionary leader, brilliant strategist, but he was also a ruthless conqueror.
Someone who wasn't afraid to use violence to get what he wanted.
So how do we reconcile these seemingly opposite sides of him? Was he a hero or a villain? Unifier or destroyer?
I don't think there's an easy answer. And that's what makes him so fascinating. He challenges us to think about history in all its complexity.
Right. It's not just about good versus evil, black and white.
Exactly. And maybe the biggest lesson we can take away from Alexander is that history isn't about worshiping heroes or demonizing villains.
It's about understanding the nuances, the contradictions, the messy reality of human ambition and its consequences.
Well said. Now, you provided some really insightful sources on Alexander, and they offer some different takes on what motivated him.
Oh yeah, like what?
Well, one thing that stood out to me is this whole debate about how much his upbringing and education shaped his actions.
You're talking about his mother, Olympias, instilling this sense of destiny, and Aristotle influencing his views on leadership, the pursuit of knowledge.
Exactly. Some historians argue that Alexander saw himself as a kind of philosopher king, destined to bring enlightenment and civilization to the world.
But others point to his ambition, his ruthlessness.
Right, like he was driven more by a thirst for power than by any noble ideals.
It's tough to disentangle those motivations.
Isn't it? Was he truly trying to create a better world? Or was all that high-minded rhetoric just a way to justify his conquests?
It's a question we all have to answer for ourselves as we grapple with this complex and contradictory figure.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good place to pause for now. You, the listener, you've delved deep into the source material, considered the arguments. Now you're in a great position to form your own conclusions about Alexander the Great.
It's amazing how Alexander the Great, centuries later, still sparks so much debate.
I know, right?
It's like a historical Rorschach test.
Yeah.
People see what they want to see. Hero, villain, something in between.
Well, that's what makes studying history so interesting, right?
Totally.
It's not about finding the one right answer. It's about looking at the evidence, coming up with your own interpretations. And Alexander's life definitely gives you a lot to think about.
Oh, absolutely. One thing that stood out to me from the sources was just how differently Alexander is portrayed in different accounts.
Yeah, like in some, he's practically a god.
Right. And then in others, they really focus on his, ruthlessness, his cruelty.
It really shows you how history can be, well, manipulated.
Written by the victors.
Exactly. Or at least by people with an agenda, like take Arrian's Anabasis Alexandri.
One of the most detailed accounts of his campaigns.
Right, but Arrian was writing centuries later during the Roman Empire.
So he had a different perspective.
Definitely. He admired Alexander, saw him as a role model for Roman emperors.
So we have to read these accounts with a critical eye.
Oh, absolutely. Consider the author's perspective, their biases.
And that's where having multiple sources comes in handy.
For sure. You can compare them, try to get a more balanced picture.
That's what makes this whole deep dive so cool. It's not just learning about Alexander's life. It's learning how to think critically about these sources, how to interpret them.
Yeah, and that's a useful skill even beyond history, don't you think?
Oh, definitely. I mean, we're bombarded with information all the time, different narratives, different perspective.
Exactly, being able to sift through it all, spot the bias, form your own informed opinions, that's crucial.
Couldn't agree more. So, thinking about Alexander's legacy, I was really intrigued by one of the sources you provided that looked at his impact on trade routes.
Oh, yeah, that was a fascinating one.
It argued that his campaigns, even though they were driven by military and political goals, they ended up boosting trade networks across huge distances.
It's funny how things work out
I
sometimes.
know, right? We usually focus on the cultural impact of his empire, the military side of things, but the economic implications are huge.
Totally. I mean, he conquered Persia, pushed into Central Asia and India.
Yeah.
That opened up all these new trade routes.
Connecting the Mediterranean world with the East,
And that led to more exchange of goods, ideas, technologies.
which had a ripple effect on both East and West.
Exactly. It's a good reminder that history is all interconnected.
Actions have unintended consequences.
And sometimes even wars can lead to some positive outcomes.
It's true. Now, speaking of unintended consequences, another source you gave me dove into this debate about whether Alexander's empire was ultimately a force for good or for bad.
Ah, yes. The age-old question.
It's a tough one. On one hand, he spread Greek culture and learning, encouraged trade, promoted a more cosmopolitan world.
But on the other hand, brutal conquests, tons of suffering. His empire didn't even last that long.
It's those moral complexities of history.
Right. There are no easy answers, no clear-cut good guys and bad guys.
It really makes you think, how do we judge historical figures?
Right. By their intentions, the outcome of their actions.
The standards of their own time, or ours.
These are questions historians have been asking forever, and there isn't one right answer.
But that's what's so great about history. It's not about just memorizing names and dates.
It's about really engaging with the past, thinking about the complexities.
And coming to your own conclusions.
And with someone like Alexander, well, your conclusions are going to be just as complex as he was.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, any final thoughts for our listeners?
I'd say, don't be afraid to challenge those traditional narratives. Dig a little deeper, ask those tough questions.
Because history, it's not static.
Right. It's a living thing. We're always reinterpreting it, reevaluating it as new evidence comes out.
And most importantly, keep exploring.
Yes. There's so many fascinating stories out there.
And each one is a chance to learn, grow, understand ourselves and the world a little bit better.
Well said. It's been great diving into the world of Alexander with you.
Likewise. And to our listeners, thank you for coming along on this journey with us. We hope it's made you curious to explore even more. Keep asking those questions.
Definitely.
Until next time, happy diving.